Welcome to episode 38 of Posture Labs and Alignment Fundamentals. My name is Emma and I'm your guide. This tutorial or this class is going to have 3 whole poses that we go over, so it might be a little bit longer than the last ones. But we're kind of going to build off of what we did last week. So last week we did upward facing bow. That's one of the deepest backbends that I have in this series. So what we would traditionally do after a really deep backbend is some counter poses. So in this week's episode, we're going to go over shoulder stand and a modification, plow pose, and ear pressure pose. Those are Salamba Sarvangasana, Halasana, and Karna Pidasana in Sanskrit. Let's go ahead and get started. Grab a block if you want to do supported shoulder stand. Let's go ahead and we'll lie down onto our backs right away. If you didn't watch last week and the week before's tutorial, we did bridge pose and upward facing bow. Traditionally in class, we would do those back bends followed by these counter poses. So I might recommend you check those out before you do this tutorial, but that's not mandatory. When you're ready, grab your block. We're going to do supported shoulder stand first. Lift your hips up like you're going to bridge pose and slide that block underneath your lower back. I like the shortest height so you have the most surface area. This is our supported bridge pose, and we did this 2 episodes ago along with regular bridge pose. Now from here, all you do is extend your legs up and boom, you're in supported shoulder stand. This is great for people with any sort of neck injury or pain. Of course, if you feel neck pain here, you want to avoid this as well. But shoulder stand, the full version, can be a lot on your neck. So this is a wonderful alternative for people who might not want to practice that. This is also a nice alternative for people who have really, really big shoulders. So a lot of athletes that I work with, they have very big shoulder muscles and bicep muscles. So getting into a regular shoulder stand, as you'll see in a few minutes, can be very, very difficult. So this is a nice alternative where you're still getting the benefits of the pose, but you don't have to compromise or suffer. So once you get here, this requires very minimal engagement, maybe a little engagement through your abs and inner thighs, but this is pretty much it. For regular shoulder stand, we're not going to be using the block. You want to keep your gaze straight up, so I recommend watching the tutorial before trying it on your own. I don't recommend turning your head side to side when you're trying to get into this pose. Start with your elbows by your side and kind of dig your elbows into the mat. You're going to use your upper abdomen to lift your hips up and then use your hands to support your low back. You want your fingers pointing up towards your butt like you're going to reach into your jean pockets. Use more of your palms, less of your fingers. Now at this point, as you can see, if I had really, really big shoulders or biceps, it might be hard for me here. I'm going to try to walk my elbows in a little bit closer to each other. That way I can just get my hands a little bit more underneath my hips. I want to keep my gaze up at my feet. So I'm going to engage my core, my legs, my inner thighs. I'm going to floint my feet, which is a mix between point and flex. It's a small detail, but you're welcome to join me in doing that. Otherwise, just make sure your feet are active in some way. Now here, if I feel too much pressure in my neck, I'm going to want to avoid the pose, but if it's not too much, I'm going to press the back of my skull down. So as I press the back of my skull down, I'm sharing the weight between the back of my skull and my shoulders. It's really not my neck that's even touching the mat so much. So it should feel a little bit better, especially as I start to move into our next pose, which is Halasana Plow pose. I'm going to take my legs overhead, trying to reach my toes towards the mat. Now at this point, I might need to wiggle my toes back. You could keep your toes tucked or untuck your toes. You're going to get a very different stretch regardless of what you do. Keep your hands at your low back, or Baddha Hasta, bind your hands. Now when I bind my hands, I hyperextend my elbows here, so you can see my elbows are lifting up off the mat. So what I personally like to do instead is grab the outside edges of the mat. I offered this in our bridge tutorial as well. So you're still going to get that nice extra pressure of the bind without having to hyperextend your joints, which is nice. You're also free to leave your hands at your low back. Here especially, you might feel pressure in your neck. This is when I'd really recommend pushing the back of your skull down so you can kind of alleviate some of that pressure. It's normal to feel a little bit claustrophobic here, so keep that in mind. Just try to breathe as deeply as you can. If you're feeling okay in halasana, you can bend your knees and hug your knees towards your temples. Ideally, the tops of your shins will come all the way down to the mat. However, even for me, who I would say I'm pretty flexible, that isn't always possible. So don't get hung up on what the pose looks like. Just do your best. You can keep your hands at your low back, or again, Baddha Hasta bind, or grab the outside edges of your mat. Keep trying to lift your hips. Press the back of your skull down and breathe as deeply as you can. When you're ready, we'll slowly start to make our way down, rolling out one vertebrae at a time. Now, the most important parts of shoulder stand, like any pose, are if you feel pain, especially in a joint, and your neck joint is a very important joint because it connects your spine. So we really don't want to play around with it. If you feel pain, please avoid the pose. It's really not worth it. Try not to turn your head side to side. I see this a lot with new students who have never done the pose before. They're looking around to see what other people are doing. That's totally fine to look around and see what other people are doing, but do that before you attempt the pose. Once you're on your back with some pressure on your neck, please just try to keep your gaze straight up and listen to the cues. If you're confused and want to watch, come out of the pose and then look around, watch the video, get some more information, and then give it another shot. That is just for your own protection. Of course, I can't stop you from doing that. When you're in shoulder stand, I've noticed a lot of people have a tendency to just completely relax. So they relax their legs. I want you to think of this kind of like a headstand. When you're in headstand, most of us are not going to completely relax our body at all. You're a constant engagement because you don't want to fall out of the pose. Think of the same thing here. I want that constant engagement through your legs, your core. It still should be a very active pose. Whereas if you don't want an active pose, maybe you should take supported shoulder stand, which is still a wonderful pose in and of itself. It's just different. You're still getting the nice release of pressure from your feet, lymphatic drainage, great for reducing inflammation in your lower body, but it just doesn't require as much strength or as much physical effort. If you have any questions about these poses, please feel free to let me know. One thing I didn't mention in Karnapidasana, because I was breathing as much as I could, but I want you to hug your knees in towards your temples. So on that one, you want to be squeezing your inner thighs. So you're almost, think of like wearing earmuffs or headphones. You're trying to squeeze your knees towards your ears, ideally. Most people can't get their knees to their ears, so that's why I say temples instead. But think like headphones, trying to cover your ears and squeeze inwards. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I got. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you back next week for a nice counter pose to all of these rounded spine poses. See you back next week. Thank you for tuning in.